Hey guys, this is Todd Hayen here with ManTalk, and William Impey over to my right over there, and say hello. Hello. And we're going to do something a little different today. We've got a little film from 1947 that is a one of those little documentaries I think they used to show in school. It's to help kids learn how to be decent people. And the interesting thing is, it was made quite a while ago, and the words of advice are pretty sound today. But we'll go through it, and as we're going to run it next to us, we're going to change the format here for the showing, and we'll comment through it. There's a lot of dead space in it, so we'll be able to throw in. I mean, it's kind of like Mystery Theater 3000 back in the day, where the robot and the guy would like make these smart ass comments about the movie they were running.
It sounds like our show, two idiots making commentary.
Yeah,
on what's happening.
Exactly. We'll try not to be idiots or assholes, but who knows? We may have a few things to say. I mean, it's very stylized, so there might be some openings for some smart ass comments. We'll see as we go. I think the guy that plays the name of the film is Shy Guy, and I think the guy that plays the shy guy, whose name is Phil, I think in the film was I think it's Dick York. Is that his name? He was the first Darren McGavin, or not Darren McGavin, that's somebody else. Darren on Bewitched back in the. I was looking at that. He plays like a 17-year-old, 18-year-old kid in this. I mean, that would have made him in 1947. And Bewitched, I think, was in the 60s, wasn't it? I mean, he must have been really. Anyway, whatever, who cares? Okay, I'm going to switch over to this different format, and we'll just immediately start this thing and go through it and see what we come up with. Here we go.
In class, it's not so bad. But when school's out and the others go off to enjoy themselves, well, if you're what they call a shy guy, that's when you really feel it. The loneliness of being new in town. You don't know how to make people like you, and you find yourself holding a grudge against them. You're standing on the outside looking in. You might have something to contribute to their conversation, but nobody cares whether you do or not. There's a barrier, and you don't know how to begin breaking it down. You imagine they keep watching the way you look, the way you act. They think you're different. So you head for home. What else? But still you...
Yeah.
Yeah, so immediately I'm thinking about, like, social anxiety is such a big issue now for kids this age, right? And definitely after COVID, when you lock everybody away, right? Especially like in this critical period of development. I think we're dealing in an age now with like just through the roof levels of social anxiety, right?
Oh, big time. Yeah.
And the trouble is that like, and then, but rather than having to learn how to engage, there's this back door, which is like, well, we just talk online, whatever. We get our kind of social needs, well, we scratch that itch. I don't know if the needs get met. I mean, I think a lot of kids do argue that it does feel like they get a lot of their social needs met online, and then it's only sort of old school people like us that project onto them that they're not. I don't know about that, but it's interesting that we're talking about this. But we're also what's very interesting is that this is about, hey man, this is your problem. Your social anxiety is your problem. You need to get over this. You don't need to have other people come to you and go and tell the teacher that the kids are ignoring you, and I think that's kind of an attitude that I worry that kind of is persistent these days, where it's like, oh, well, if the kids are ignoring you, you go and not ask dad for advice, which we'll see in a minute, but like that somehow it's about like, oh, you're not including him in your conversation. What's wrong with you? As opposed to, oh, you're feeling excluded. What are you going to do about it? You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of assumptions that are made in this, and one is that all these kids are decent and don't have psychological issues for themselves, and they just don't see Phil as existing, that he's like transparent until he's made himself seen. There's also an assumption that Phil, I think that's his name, Phil himself is not on the spectrum, which could be. I mean, I think there's a lot of kids that are on that spectrum that have a difficult time socializing for reasons other than just because they're not paying attention or whatever. We'll see later as they handle it.
But my estimation is that they're presenting him as being like within normal range.
Of course. I understand that. If we're applying it to what's going on today, though, I would just throw that in there. It's not that important. There's a great book by, I think it's Jonathan Haidt. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, called the Anxious Generation, or the Generation, the Anxious Generation. Yeah, I think is that. And it's quite a fascinating book. He goes into current times. You know, the Gen, is it Gen X or Gen Z that we're in right now? Which one is it?
Gen Z, but I think there's another one coming. We're going back to the beginning as far as
right, where he talks about the whole social thing with the phones and the cell phones, and how that generation communicates, and why all of this is so pathological. But of course, this film is way before any of that. So, which basically started in the early 2000s, 2009 or so.
Another interesting point, though, is that like this is pre-Vietnam, so America is still in its like innocence phase, right?
It's right after
pre-Vietnam.
It's right after World War II.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a very interesting time in America, particularly when you're dealing with social community and whatnot, because they just came out of this very socially or community conscious period. Where everybody was ganging together and very nationalistic and very much focused on, America being, we were just moving into the Cold War, just moving into Sputnik going up and causing everybody to freak out over Russians and whatnot. So anyway, those are just little sidebars. But it does give you some idea about this kind of idealistic. And that's a reason why my first comment about the assumption, there is an assumption there that everybody was raised well and everybody had full faculty of being able to deal with trauma and with anxiety and whatnot. And that, of course, wasn't even true at the time. But the film is certainly depicting it that way. This is the perfect American ideal. You do have shy people. I mean, are we just dealing with introversion? No, because
it's more than that, though.
It's more than that, because introverts have friends. They may have a small handful of them. I was an introvert going through high school, and I was not part of the gang, but I had my other strange off shy guy friends, and he doesn't have any. So anyway, you want to say anything else? You want me to run it?
Yeah, about that being in the phase, when you're in a kind of collective survival space, like in war, putting your needs first is a real liability. It's really frowned upon, right? It's like, I was saying this to someone recently, like, when there's a small amount of pie, everyone's very careful to make sure that they don't look like they're taking too big a piece of the pie. And I think that really turns into you taking responsibility for yourself. That recognizing that, in a time of crisis, if you are a liability and not an asset, you're the problem, right? And I think it's a very deeply ingrained thing in masculine initiatory phases of learning how. In crisis, you look for ways in which you can help, not ways in which other people can help you. And Kennedy says that in Ask Not What You're
Right. Well, you definitely see that in this. I mean, one of my first impressions, and as everybody sees it, because we've only played a minute or so of it, is that the whole point here is to get Phil to conform with the social norms that everyone else is conforming to, that he's not really allowed to be different. He's not allowed to be unusual. He ends up dressing differently. He ends up doing a lot of things to conform and comply with what is considered the normal state to be in. He doesn't do that entirely, but it's still, that's one of the primary messages given here, I think. And that's not necessarily the most ideal way to go about it. But anyhow, I won't talk before we've seen it. So you ready to start it again, William? Okay, here we go.
Can't forget that you're alone, an outsider.
Hello, Phil. How's everything?
Oh, okay, I guess, Dad.
I love this
Record
guy.
Transmitter and microphone coming.
Oh, all right, I guess. I know it isn't either. I can't figure out where to connect in the oscillator. I know I have to connect it into the amplifier, but where? It just doesn't fit in.
Why not a store and get more information? And by the way, how are things going in school?
Oh, okay, Dad. But school here isn't like it was back in Morristown.
Well, you know, son, maybe school is like your radio. This oscillator will do its work well. But as you said, you still have to fit it in so it can work with all the other parts.
Yeah, pause right there.
Yeah, nothing like metaphor. That works wonders, doesn't it?
No, and you know what's interesting? I was thinking about last episode where I'm talking about the Nigerian guy, right? Because he's modeling that attitude that I found so refreshing and unique, which is that, like, I don't need Nigeria to change for me. Nigeria is a homophobic country, and if I want to live in a place where there's no homophobia, I'm not going to ask Nigeria to change. I'm going to go to a country where they're more accepting of it. And I think that's the kind of attitude that he's saying, which is like, and look, the reality is that it goes both ways. I mean, to a certain extent, we want the world to be accepting of us, and to a certain extent, we have to accept the world as it is. Where we're at right now is this narcissistic belief that the world absolutely needs to bend over for us. And this is a contrast to that big time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but there's again an assumption there that we want to even be part of that. And, that we have to bend over for the world doesn't bend over for us. You can also take the stance that neither has to bend over for anything. That you can still be an outlier, you can be the third man out, you can be non-integrated with the world to a certain degree, of course. I mean, a certain degree it becomes, socially pathological, but there is not that message here, and at this time there wouldn't be. There wouldn't be the message that, hey, you can be who you are, and still the primary tenets of the message that the Father gives him are all sound, and they're good. And I mean, I'm not arguing against that. I'm not saying, the Father should not have told Phil to do what he eventually tells him or suggests that he do. I'm not implying that. I'm just saying that there also is not a place in here of being weird and being okay to be weird.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because this is, like I'm saying before, it's like this is before the 1960s when counterculture became.
That's right.
Was like, I don't even know what to say. Like it was allowed. The problem with the 1950s is that conformity was the rule.
Right.
And the 1960s was a revolution against that.
That's right.
No, we need to have a counterculture, and I think that's when the shift really started to come. So yeah, he's living in a world in which there is no sense of counterculture. Nowadays, kids live in a world where not only is the counterculture accepted, it's like it makes you cool to be part of counterculture.
Well, I was just going to say, I think we live in a world now that parallels this one, because there is not an acceptance of not complying and not being part of the culture. It's this whole idea of diversity. It's actually the other way around. It's like, let's homogenize everything into one idea. It's all acceptable, but it's still one idea. Everybody complies, everybody gets vaccinated, everybody does this, whatever it might be that the culture is demanding of everyone. So we're dealing with a similar culture. I mean, it is not like the 60s where you had an age break, where you had the older people were all very, from the 50s, they were all very conforming and compliant, and then you had the crazy hippie kids. And we don't have that now.
I think we gone the other way, though. I mean, right? Because now it's like someone said recently, like there's like, for example, there's no more avant-garde art.
No, right.
The avant-garde be the punk. There's no such thing as punk rock anymore. In fact, the kind of the running joke is like, if to be punk rock now is to become a Christian. That's the punk rock move.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, yeah. That's good. The other thing I was going to throw in here, for anybody that's into radio electronics or whatever, I think it's interesting talking about this oscillator and the transmitter doesn't make any sense. And the other thing that's interesting is that by the end of this film, his transmitter ends up being a record player. You'll notice that. That's just a little sidebar. Doesn't mean anything at all, but it's like this is the magic of movies. You can make anything. But anyway, here we'll go with it.
I know what you're driving at, Dad, but I don't think I ever will fit in. Not here. I'm different from the guys in this town.
Well, as far as that goes, Phil, everybody's different. That's what makes people interesting.
Maybe.
You know,
he doesn't buy that.
When we moved here this summer, I had quite a time making friends in a new office where everybody else knew each other.
What'd you do, Dad?
Well, that's beside the point, son. What works for one doesn't necessarily work for another.
But I bet the other men didn't look at your clothes all the time.
Well, what makes you think they look at your clothes?
Oh, because the other fellas wear sweaters or just shirts, not a regular suit like mine.
Well, wear a sweater then. But clothes alone won't... Phil, what about the other fellows? What do they do? What do they like?
Gosh, Dad, I don't know. I never noticed. Only I know it's not radios.
Perhaps that's the reason you don't know. You don't notice what the others are interested in. Why not try to find out?
How, Dad?
Well, you might try watching, listening. Pick out the most popular boys and girls in school and keep an eye on them. Try to figure out why people like them. Not that you'll ever be just like any of them, but you might learn something. Well, see you at dinner.
Well, there's an idea. Maybe a good idea. Worth a try, anyway. And tomorrow's not too soon to start.
Here, pause it there. So, yeah, so the father's essential idea here is that you need to do more to fit in, right?
Yeah, but he also makes it clear that you might not fit in, that you might still be different. And I thought that was good because I hadn't noticed that the first time I ran through this.
Buy it though, right? He doesn't. His dad goes like, "Hey,
no, right? He does,
and he goes, "I don't."
Like us, I don't know. Yeah,
because I think he has the sense that the dominant paradigm here is toward conformity, and so the father is the one that needs to give him permission to be, to be different and to let that right. Yeah. It's, oh shoot, I was going to say something. I forgot what it was. It's anyway, whatever. I'll think of it later. So you want to keep going? Yeah.
Pick out the most popular boys and girls in school and keep an eye on them. Who are they now? Some of them are right here in this class. Andy.
Oh, I know what it was. The father makes it a point, and this is such a very, very important, valid psychological behavioral point, is to not be the speaker, not constantly get in the way of observation by feeling like you need to be inputting, and to actually listen and to observe, to see what it is that other people are thinking and see how other people handle themselves. I think this is probably the most important valid thing the father says to him to do.
Yeah, right. Which is, we rebranded as, in the spiritual world, holding space.
Exactly.
This idea that I'm gonna deprioritize my needs and prioritize yours as a kind of gift to you, in order to sort of allow for your need for space to be there.
Right.
And even it's like, I'm going to be involved in a ceremony, but I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to hold space, meaning like I'm not going to get in the way. And then for therapists too, it's like, I'm going to withhold my need to make a point or ask more questions, because I'm going to give you the opportunity to talk out what you're feeling.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
Right.
And again, like the things that are old or new again. I mean, I think a lot of us think that this is some kind of new idea, like reflexive listening, is somehow new. But here he is, 1950s. The dad's being like, listen more than you talk.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Right. And observe. You know, be aware of your surroundings. You know, this meditative sense of like you said, holding the space and being able to take in information more than spit it out. It's not about impressing people with your flamboyance or what your smartness or what you have to say. It's about listening, and of course he uses that later. I mean, it's not like he just sits there and listens to people, but it's that learning about people and understanding that that's really what makes things work better. So I'll keep going.
McIntyre, for instance. People like him, all right. Chick Gallagher rates high in popularity, too. There's Jane Davenport. She's popular with boys and girls. And Jack Gilbert. What's he got that makes people like him so much? Andy's got something to say, and Jack's listening. He really seems interested. Come to think of it, Jack's always interested in what people are talking about. Maybe that's why he hits it off so well with everybody. Anyhow, Andy thinks he's a great guy. No, that's too easy. Just listening. For what's this? Sounds like Jane's caught on to the same thing. She's listening. Hearing about Helen's collection of menus and liking it. That makes her kingpin with Helen. Maybe there is something in this business of being a good listener.
Yeah, pause it for 1 second.
Okay, hold on.
He's onto something there, right? It's like, well, wait a minute, because it kind of goes both ways. And I actually he's making the point that I was holding, which was, yeah, but the problem with privileging the idea of space holding, which is a good one, but it also will really give you kind of cover to not let yourself shine. Right? And to not stand in your power, and to not stand in your brilliance, and to not offer what it is that you have to offer. And yeah, it's like it's a positive quality, but it has to be balanced. And I was going to say, like, yeah, maybe, and I think he probably gets this later. If you've held sufficient space, if you've really let someone feel that they've been heard, and you've reflected back what they've said and really taken it in, once that's been accomplished, then the next piece for you is to, okay, now it's my opportunity to speak my mind and to let myself shine, and and put myself out there, and so it becomes a two-way street. But the doorway in for him is a good one, because if he is really high in introversion, perfect. Well, I already know how to hold back and to not right. But he's figuring. Well,
again, I mean, he before he's starting to figure stuff out, he was more concerned about his own presence and why it was that he was not integrating well with people. It was about him. It was all, centrally focused and his own, I must be ugly. I must wear the wrong clothes. I must have nothing to say or be stupid or whatever. And he's learning through this process. This is his learning period where he starts to see what it is that other people are doing in order to have the kind of relationships that he admires that they're having.
Classic developmental task for the adolescent.
Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Still, there must be more to getting along with people than just wearing a sweater and listening.
What's the matter, Bob? Handle stuck?
Yeah, I can't get it open.
Oh, here, let me try. There's a trick to some of these. There.
Gee, thanks a lot, Chick.
Now, why didn't you think of that? Chick's always doing things for people. And it pays off in friends.
Boy, that sure is one tough history assignment we have for Friday. Wish I could find some good outside reading material.
I found a swell book that covers everything Miss Carson wants us to know. It's called The Last Days of Monarchism by Henry Darrow. You can get it at the library.
I'm sure glad you told me about it. I'll get it this afternoon. Thanks a lot, Bob.
It's okay, Chick.
Yeah, dope.
Yeah.
You knew about
it. Wasn't the Communist Manifesto by any chance.
Sorry, Celia?
It wasn't the Communist Manifesto by any chance. Yeah.
What was it?
The book he suggested to read, it was The Last of the Monarchists or something. I'm just saying.
Why would it be the Communist Manifesto?
Yeah, just because it would be just what you would hear in a 1947 school hallway.
But,
I got detention for reading that once, and this was in like 1968 or so.
Really?
It was in our class library, and I checked it out because I was curious about it, and I got in big trouble for it and got detention. Yeah, so that's why I probably mentioned it. Just funny. Anyway, what were you going to say?
No, just that, like, I don't think we really live in a culture where people want to help anymore. I think it's now to the point where it's like, don't get involved. Because you don't know what this person is going to tell you to fuck off. They don't want your help. I'll give you an example. I remember recently, maybe like last spring or something, I was out for a walk, and there was this woman, maybe my age, a little bit younger, and she's being accosted by this mentally ill person who's like standing in front of her and screaming and yelling and like being really aggressive and like fucking scary dude, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I come up to her, and she's yelling back at him. And so I'm like walking right past the two of them. And so I kind of feel like, well, I'm not just going to like, because she's like backing up, like
right.
So I kind of like stopped and I leaned in and I said, hey, are you good? Like, what's happening here? And her response was like, fuck off, like,
wow,
what the fuck are you doing? And I'm like,
wow,
fine.
Wow.
It feels like that, but then I'm doing this math in my head and I'm like, okay, if I had continued going and that guy had jumped at her and attacked her or whatever, easily, it's like, why the fuck didn't you step in? What's wrong? Like, there's someone being accosted. You should be supportive of.
Oh no, you did the right thing, no question.
But it's not like it's a pretty common thing now where this woman's like, fuck off, don't white knight me. Like,
yeah.
I don't fucking need your help. I'm dealing with this guy. Cool, fine. But I think we're in that phase now where there's a lot of like, and they say in China it's really bad. I don't know if this is just like, rumors, but friends of mine that live there, it's like, somebody will collapse on the street and everyone just sort of goes like, I don't want to get involved. I don't like.
Well, that's been around a while. There's that famous, I think it was it Life magazine back in the 60s or early 70s that ran some article. They did some experiment where they had somebody in New York City like fake an assault and nobody did anything. Mm-hmm. I think it was more common back then than it is now, but I see what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I think it's more, again, if we're looking at high school kids, that's one of the things about this film that I'm not even sure if this was present in the 40s. Right. Is this willingness to help and to be responded to in a positive way if you interject yourself into somebody's issues, if they're having a problem with their locker or somebody, just to go up to them or something and go up to them and say, hey, let me help you with that. If he did that, if Phil did that instead of what's his name that did it, the kid might in real life might not have responded well. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, who the hell are you? You're not my friend. Mm-hmm. You're that weirdo that plays with radio, and again, that's what I'm saying. This is a little film that they're making. It's like, who cares? But I don't think Phil would have that. Phil goes through his exercises and learns something, as we'll see as this goes on, and actually is responded to very positively for his efforts. Mm-hmm. And any kids watching this back in the 40s go, hey, okay, I'm going to do what Phil did, and does it. I'm not quite so sure if they would get the same positive response that Phil gets. And this is where getting deeper into psychology, dealing with complexes, family traumas, whatever the kids experience. I think even more so today, I think the situation would be radically different today than it was then. I'm not quite sure if there's shy people in school today. You might not have the same issues, but I think they would be. And we'll talk about this after.
Yeah, no, it's a very very good point that you're making. Like, I think a lot of these things they kind of they're presented in this vacuum.
Yes, yeah.
It's in a vacuum, and I think for a lot of people, it's kind of like they got burned by this because they kind of took the advice and they realized, oh, but now I have to deal with the radical particulars of my situation,
right,
that are not the
right.
The kind of idealized conditions under which this imperative is accepted.
And I think one of the main reasons why you like this, I totally get. I think that the advice the father gives is really sound.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And even though it might not have yielded the same results that Phil gets from it, doesn't mean the advice isn't sound. I mean, it's very, very sound. So anyway, let me keep going. Unless you got something else you want to. Okay.
That book, you could have been the guy that helped a guy. There it is again. Even when you bump into people, they hardly know you're alive. You're alone, bud. Alone in the crowd.
Victim.
But keep looking around. Try to find out what the score is.
There you go.
Jack and Beezy over there. Girls seem to like them. Why? What's the angle? They do act kind of polite. At least they seat the girls and give their orders to the waiter. They aren't loud like some of the guys.
Cherry Coke, chocolate Coke, milkshake, and wallet. Double chocolate wallet. Right. Okay, I got it. Whoa, jeez.
Excuse me, please. I've got the orders for my table. Just helping out during rush hour, Bob.
Gee, thanks a lot, Chick. That's swelling.
Okay, Bob.
That's swell.
Yeah, here, pause for a second. That's interesting, right? That like.
Wait a second. Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
That there's this, because I'm immediately thinking about, okay, if you put this in 2025, it's like no. Politeness and helping out. It's like, no, that makes you a nerd. I mean,
that's right. That's right.
Myself because apparently the kids don't know what nerd.
No, they don't. Yeah.
But like, no, it's like now disagreeableness and a kind of defiance and a fuck off. It's kind of like if you're too goody two shoes, everyone's a little suspicious that you're kind of social poison. But here they're presenting it as like, no, it's not loud like the other guys, and he's not. It's like, don't be rude and impolite because those people are rejected. Maybe true then, but I don't know that it's true now. I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
No, I don't think it is true now. I think that we reached and this is going to sound really old man to say, but I think we did reach a point, a zenith of proper social conduct during, I mean, maybe this didn't actually happen, but at least what they're depicting here of kids this age being polite and being observant and being listeners and being people that, are like these kids are. If that actually was true anywhere, I think it was during this time. It probably wasn't across the board, 100%. I'm sure, you still had gang members, you had kids from really impoverished, abusive families and blah, blah, blah. So you're going to have a whole range of pathologized and traumatized kids. But let's say in a general sense that this is how kids were supposed to be. And a lot of them probably were like that. But no, I think that the culture has been essentially devolving since that time. And I grew up through part of it, but it was more like this when I was this age, or at least to be expected to be like this. My sisters probably are from this period. For the most part, they might be a little younger. But anyway, it definitely is not like this now. Now, I obviously am not physically in situations like this, and I don't see clients younger than 18 or 19 years old. So I'm sure the experiences that they share with me as a client does not match. It's more like what you just said. I mean,
and I think the other part of this, I mean, I have a window into this because I have an 11-year-old.
Yeah, right.
Going to 20, she's like in her adolescence at 11.
Yeah.
Very cute. But no, I think, it's a yes and a no, because I think what I would say to her is, look, yeah, for sure. It's going to come off as nerdy and corny if you're like overly polite and kind of playing the good girl. Playing the bad girl, short term is like definitely going to be attractive, but long term, being a good person, being solid, loyal, good listener, person that puts other people's needs before their own, a person who's trustworthy. That long term is going to pay off even now, right?
Absolutely. And what I was going to say a second ago, which I was curious to hear what you would say with this. Would you, if you had to compare the two cultures, like compare this in this film culture and compare it to what you've just describing, say the kids this age, how they treat one another and whatever, which would you say was more pathological? I'm sorry, maybe you wouldn't. I would say now is because of what you just said. I think that these attributes that they're describing or pointing out here of being listener, being kind, being polite, all of those things create strong relationships, either as kids or certainly as adults when you're going into adulthood, when you're in the workforce, when you're married and have a family, whatever, where the other doesn't. I think it eventually falls apart. I mean, how many clients do I have? How many couples do I have that can't communicate? They're mean to one another. Is that a product of that kind of bringing up? The kind of bringing up that creates kids like that, or comparing it to the kind of bringing up that makes kids like this?
The argument would be that there's like everything has its shadow, right? Okay, so what you're describing now is that if you're growing up in a time in which conformity and politeness and going along to get along isn't the norm, then yeah, there's going to be a lack of civility. But on the other hand, if you're growing up under conformity and civility, then there's no space for you to rebel. And so, I don't want to be in the sort of the detached place of relativism, because I think you're probably right in that we definitely have seen a skyrocketing increase in what we would call mental illness, if such things exist. People not well adjusted to the environments that they're in and suffering as a result. But bigger picture, though, I mean, I think there's a bit of a trade-off, and that's why getting into like one's better than the other. I mean, yeah, I mean,
Well, sure. Yeah, I mean, what you just said is really important. What I'm saying is more of a broad stroke, I think, more of a middle of the bell curve kind of idea. You always want to have outliers. You want to have rebels. You want to have artists. You want to have weird people. You want to have all of that in order to balance out the culture.
You have to, not even you want to. It's
right. You have to. But anyway, this is a big topic I shouldn't have brought up, but let's go on with the film and talk more later.
I love the way it's made.
Hey, don't tell me you two are still talking clothes. Was this a plot to squelch all males present?
Nothing's changed.
I guess so. Shut the fuck up, kid. So he looks around for another man. Come on over here. Balance this out.
He's an ally.
Right, exactly.
Phil, sit down. Make yourself at home. Good for you.
We know his name.
Hello, everybody. Okay. We men need some support to run down this girlie's chatter.
Okay. I think this is kind of an interesting point in the film because Phil wasn't doing anything to be noticed other than that he was a swinging dick in the malt shop. So it's interesting that they go through this whole thing talking about how he's invisible and how he doesn't listen. He didn't do anything. He was just standing there and the guy goes, "Hey, come on over here." So I think that's kind of funny.
But it's an interesting thing too, it's like on the one hand, my immediate reaction is like, oh, this young man needs to learn how to be comfortable in female dominated spaces. But I also completely understand that he's like, I'd like there to be a little bit of balance here, so that I have someone that I can relate to, so that I don't feel excluded from the conversation. And I think both are legitimate. I think I do too. Yeah, men need to learn how to be in female dominated spaces,
right?
And be okay with that, and be able to like really benefit from that. But it's perfectly understandable that you want someone to be on your side in allegiance, and it's perfectly understandable that that men who are high in masculine don't share the same interests as women who are high in the feminine. Men are
they don't.
subjects and ideas, and women are about relationships and about, and so it's like perfectly normal that like, if you and I are talking about, I don't know, cars, women tune out because they're like not interested in cars. They start talking about, who said what to who, and we tune out. We're not interested. Perfectly normal. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think part of what we get into, is this really ridiculous thing where it's like, oh, you should overcome the fact that you're not interested in relationships, that you're interested in cars. That somehow like constitutes you integrating the feminine. And I'm like, yeah, I suppose, but it's also just like, what do you expect people? Like, I'm not going to suddenly, it's no sign of evolution for me to suddenly pretend like I'm interested in things that I'm not.
No, but I think that's a really important point, because the culture wants to believe that there shouldn't be that dichotomy between the masculine and feminine, that it's like you'll get into arguments. Well, women should be just as interested in whatever, but whenever they get together, they're not. It isn't like even women that feel that, oh, the masculine should be integrated into, the whole and whatever. They don't talk about man things. They don't. They just typically don't.
They don't want that either. They don't
want it.
Partner.
No. And the same with men. The men never. Yeah, absolutely. It's just
that's one of the problems that you see right now, though, is that there are women now who are like, hey, is it okay for me to want a male partner who's really high in masculine, who will give me protection, provision, presence? Because it seems to me that somehow like makes me not a feminist, or makes me, kind of traditionally minded or conservative. And, I feel like a lot of my coaching for women is like, it's perfectly reasonable for you to want that. And it doesn't say anything other than there's not only is there an evolutionary drive in that, but there's archetypal energies in that. You want to.
Well, that's where obviously where I always go with this archetypal idea is that people seem to think that if they're driven in any way at all by an archetypal force, that there's something wrong with that. Yeah. That it's like if you're driven by a masculine archetypal force to be into cars and to want to go out and play war or whatever, if you're driven by that, or the other side of it, if a woman is driven by the feminine archetypes to sit and talk about clothes or talk about relationships or talk about their kids or whatever with a bunch of other girls, there's absolutely nothing in any way at all wrong or bad about that. No. It doesn't make you less of a feminist or anything. It has no impact on that at all. But people don't understand archetypes, obviously, and they don't understand what they mean, and they typically
they confuse archetypes with gender norms.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Like, in the first sort of step to like, I'm an OG postmodernist, man. I'm here for the freedom. I'm here for you. Your biology, like I'm not an essentialist. Your biology does not determine who you are. Like
no.
Simone de Beauvoir said it the best. It's like you're not born a woman. You're born into a female body biologically, but you're not born a woman. That's something that's programmed in, and it's culturally specific. The cult determines.
Yeah, right.
So, you can kind of go too far in either ways. The essentialists that are both either gender ideologues that think, if you can be born into the wrong body, which is essentially an essentialist idea. They agree with the Christians and tradwife guys who thinks that a woman, should have interest in, maternal things. The idea that I'm proposing here is you can uncouple those things, and then you're free to conform to the culture, and you're free to
That's right. That's right. If you're conscious.
The thing that Kierkegaard adds to that's really important is that you can never cut the tether between the transcendent and you have to always be grounded in but I was born in a male body, right?
But this is why in my work there's so much focus on being conscious, whatever that means. I mean, I sit here for 2 hours trying to explain that. Probably wouldn't be successful. Right. But the idea of consciousness means that you're aware of these forces, but you're also aware of the tether. You're also aware of how far you can go to disengage from them. It can certainly be in your behavior. Mm-hmm. You can disengage from archetypal behavior very easily. Not easily, but you certainly can do it. But you can't completely sever. just like what you're saying, because it'll always be there, but you can certainly be conscious enough of it that you can essentially control how you present yourself in the world, if you choose to. Should we keep going or?
Do it, yeah.
Okay.
Hey, you want them all, don't you? Yo, Bob. The topic under discussion is the mixer next Friday night at school. You're going, aren't you?
I don't know, Chick. I haven't got a date yet.
Well, grab yourself a girl and come along. It's not going to be a real party. Just the class getting together for some fun.
I'd like to, Chick. Yeah, I sure would.
There's the look.
Everything's stirred up Phil today.
And he's holding a soldering iron.
Take Mary Lou to the mixer.
Yeah.
What if she already has a date?
Well, how's the oscillator coming along?
Hi, Dad. Oh, I haven't quite got it working yet. But, you know that other business we were talking about? Well, I've been following your advice.
How about it? Find out anything?
Yeah, Dad, I think I did. It looks like people who get along best with other people are, well, the people who think about the other guy. They make a point of listening to what others have to say and watching for ways to do things for them, being polite toward them. Do you suppose it's sort of a case of thinking so much about other people that you don't have much time to yourself?
Well, perhaps that's right. Maybe the best way to find out is to try it next chance you get.
You know, Dad, there's a mixer Friday night. I wasn't going to go, but in the drugstore the other day, Chick said I ought to come.
Good idea, Phil.
Well, Dad, there is a girl I'd like to take, Mary Lou Wright. But I'm not sure she'd go with me. Never even talked to her. I'd probably fall all over myself. Besides, she's popular. She's probably got a date by now.
Well, it is pretty late to ask a girl. Why don't you just go stag? You needn't worry about doing anything wrong, Phil. You act all right. Just do and say whatever seems most natural.
Well, Dad, maybe...
It's a good dad.
Maybe it will be easier after I've had a chance to talk to her at the mixer.
Yeah.
You know what? I kind of think this is going to fit in after all.
All right, pause it for a second.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm going to shit on it first. Look, I'm immediately struck now because we're talking about, like, what the fuck? The storytelling is just, it's dishonest because this is propaganda, yeah? But then in this moment here where this guy is talking, I'm like, this is where I get into this feeling of, like, now this feels like coercive propaganda. This is created by dads. And the propaganda is this. If you take your father's advice, things will go well. And it's coercive. It's trying to coerce kids to listen to their dads, right? And you can clearly see whose interest is at stake here, right? Because he didn't get invited to the table. He didn't get the look from the chick across the room because he followed his dad's advice. That was just fucking chaos. Just in the right place at the right time. But because this is propaganda, no. He's like, you see, you trust your dad, it works. It's
also reverse. It's like not reverse logic. That's not the right thing. It's like you come to a solution and then you back up and you say, well, what would father say? You know, if this were the result, what would father say to make this the result? Because the father says things that it's like, does he have a time machine? Did he actually go into this mixer to see how it went? You know, why don't you go stag? You're okay. Everybody's going to think you're great. You're probably right not to try to ask the girl right now. It's probably too late. I mean,
it's like he's basically saying, like, you got this. You know, you're
right.
Very supportive. I love it. But yeah, I mean, I think you know, I feel just this is kind of why I have these anarchistic leanings. Because I'm not a fan of coercion. You know, when the dominant force in the world is coercing, it never works out well. It always backfires in some way. I'm very Taoist in that way. Where it's
even with a father talking to his son.
Not the father talking to the son. The way that the film presents this kind of nonsensical causal chain, it's trying to influence kids to listen to their dads, right? Because dads have good advice, and kids are naturally resistant because they're trying to individuate and they don't want to. It's a healthy part of the adolescent developmental things. So this is more of a commentary on, like, yes, these films are, interestingly enough, presenting good ideas, but that they're even presented in this way, in this propagandistic way, I think is kind of partly the problem, right? Like, I don't think kids really want to be moralized to. If, like, what you're saying and what I'm agreeing with is, like, it doesn't really work. This isn't necessarily going to work out in practice. There's your backfire right there, man. It's just like, just say no, right? Just say no, because if you smoke marijuana, you're going to turn crazy. All it takes is one kid to take one hit of a joint and go, oh, I didn't go crazy. I felt fucking amazing. And it didn't kill me. Well,
it would be very interesting to know what kids watching this at this time would think of it. I think that would be a very interesting thing to know.
I think that, like, the you know, most of them would kind of would, because they're, you know, they're in the dominant paradigm of conformity. They'd probably give you a very kind of what you want to hear answer, and then you're going to get the Eddie Haskell trickster types who behind the scenes, once there's no adults there, fuck this shit, it's nonsense.
Right.
Listen, it's not going to work.
But none of those kids are in this thing.
No, in fact,
you know,
defiance is very, very carefully kind of the child goes, the father offers defiance as an option, and he goes, it's not going to work. I don't, you know, I reject the trickster because you presented it to me.
Okay, let's check this out. Some of that devil jazz music.
Reefer Madness period.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Well, this is it. Sink or swim. Oh, there's Mary Lou. She did come with another guy. Beezy Barnes. What now?
Well, Beezy,
yeah, stay away from him.
And back then, party food was an apple.
They're breaking up the piano game. Look at Beezy, listening first to one boy, then another. It's funny the way people flock around a good listener. But what's this? They're talking about radios. It's right down your alley. They're asking Beezy about penny stock. You know the answer to that one. You could tell him. But she just to butt in. Beezy's still stuck. He really needs help. Help. That's it.
An offer of help. That's welcome anywhere. It's not hard to fit yourself into a conversation. A mention of a similar problem in connection with the record player. They're interested in that record player. They are interested in that shy guy. They know he's alive now. And strangely enough, he's just discovered that they're alive. Of course they'd like to see the record player. Of course they'll come over. Tomorrow afternoon.
I just have to do a little more soldering and connect the oscillator into the amplifier, and everything will fit in.
Oh, Phil, could you have it ready by next week and bring it over to my house?
I guess so.
Some of the gang's coming over Thursday night, and we can have a lot of fun with it. You will come, won't you?
Yeah, before we the denouement is at hand, but before we get there, it's really interesting. Like, and again, if you look closely at what happened in that scene, I mean, he basically, this is how I coach men: feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah, right.
He feels just like, oh, I have something to say. There's this natural, this aversion that comes up, this resistance that comes up, and it's like, right, you have to meet that resistance with force and push through. And lo and behold, you know, when you do, guess what? You're offering something and you're being accepted. When you push through that barrier of fear, false evidence appearing real, where you think there's going to be eternal damnation, you find
to
quote,
right.
And so that's good shit, man. That's good shit. I would have coached this kid the same way. You have something to offer, but you feel that resistance.
Yeah, so, right. Why do you think he keeps referring to himself in the third person?
I mean,
you could do that. You could fix that. Like, you know about the radio. Huh?
It's supposed to be an intrapsychic dialogue. So, I mean, I think it's like there's that. But I also just think people talk fucking weird, man. When I played this for Natalie, my partner, we were looking at it, and I was commenting. I'm like, it's so fucking weird how they talk back then. And she goes, well, do you think they really talk like that? Or is that like in the movies? And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure they talk like that. But I also think that if they were to listen to our conversation, they'd be going like, you guys talk weird. What the fuck?
Oh, of course.
Why do you have that?
Of course they would.
That weird intonation.
Yeah. The cadence and all of that. Yeah.
You think our cadence is weird? We think your cadence is weird.
Yeah. He's like Gollum or something, you know.
High pitched and kind of whiny and like.
Yeah.
But it was normal back then.
But did you notice how he turned his radio into a record player? It's like electronics. What difference does it make? It is whatever. You know. But anyway, here comes Dad with the Cokes.
Got Dad to the rescue.
Yeah. Now, of course, nowadays he brings some beer or something else or
maybe
something to snort or whatever. But here he comes. He's always got a tie on too. They had to make him look like the adult when he's probably almost 3 years older than Phil. I mean, he doesn't really look like he's like old enough to have a 17-year-old son. But anyway, here he goes.
Well, one shy guy is on his way. Not that his worries are over. He'll still have his moments of doubt, of hesitation, of fear that he might do something wrong. But he can face these problems now because he knows that he's not really different. And while he's discovered only a few of many ways to overcome shyness, he's discovered that it can be done. And that's the main thing, isn't it?
Dad to the rescue. The benevolent patriarchy that just brings.
Yeah.
Serves
you notice nobody pays any attention to Dad. He's like standing there and he keeps backing up and he's like waving and nobody's even talking to him. It's like, you can leave, Pop. We're done.
No, that's good. No, in fact, I think had he kind of insinuated himself into that and tried to steal Phil's glory, I think he would have.
That's right. That's right.
I think Dad was spot on to bring the Coca-Cola and slink out the back and.
That's right.
Let Phil bask in the glory of this.
Yeah.
Attention that he's getting.
Yeah. That's good.
So yeah, I mean, in the end, it's funny. Like the premise that we were working from here was like, have things changed that much? You know, I think we like to project from our belief in our progressiveness that things were so much worse back then. But if you look toward the way that history is presented, I think that's one of the big problems. There's a great author called Thaddeus Russell who wrote a book called The Renegade's History of the United States, where he basically takes the normal narrative that you would have been told and flips it on its head. Mm-hmm. And it's basically like, history is not what we think it is. We love to think, we get off on the idea that things were so backward and fucked back then. And to a certain extent, they were right. And to a certain extent, they're actually wrong. And that there was a lot of good stuff going on back then that we are fucking up now. But to believe that is to admit that there's something valid in conservative thinking. And believe me, progressives do not have the capacity to do that by and large these days. It's kind of crazy how it's like people put their ideologies before living in a better world. It's like, I'd rather that my ideology be proven correct, that my belief in the world be proven correct, than the world be a better place. And that's kind of nuts to me. And I think if you watch these films without an ideological lens, if you're not primed to look for racist, homophobic, right, you'll actually notice that what comes through is, behind the kind of weird coercive propaganda and the corniness and whatever, and the kind of gender stereotypical norms, what comes through is like pretty fucking good advice. And interesting that we would assume that the advice wouldn't be not that or different.
Yeah, well, values and I mean, not even morality, but values and character has pretty much stayed the same. I if you read any ancient writings or whatever, it isn't like you feel like you're reading something some lizard culture wrote back in some time. I mean, people still had the same results for being a particular way, for acting a particular way, behaving a particular way. The results were consistent. And this is what I was saying earlier to say, well, do you think that it's more pathological now? I think the results that are expected, say, in a contemporary culture, generally, and this is a very general statement, but generally does not come about. The result is not the same as what was either expected or what historically was true. Like if you're rude to somebody, or you carry yourself around, like we were talking about, kids today may be more rude with one another and not, act like these kids were acting. The result of that is not going to be much different than it would have been, 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 60 or 200 years ago. Yet there's a confusion. I've seen so many TV shows and things that cover this, that comment on this, that people get confused as to why didn't I get better results? Why didn't that boy treat me well? When a girl goes out on a date with a jerk, why didn't he treat me well? And there's a reason for it. You go back and you find the cause, and there's a causal element that essentially has been the same through centuries and centuries of human beings. And I think they were more aware of that, maybe in the 50s or 60s. Maybe not. I mean, it just seems like they were more aware of, well, if I do this, if I listen, or if I fix things and help people, then the result I'll get is more friends. But if I don't do that, if I treat people like shit and whatever, then I don't have any friends. It's not like, oh, well, you can still get friends if you treat people poorly. I don't know if that's true.
No, I hear you. And I think probably one of the big differences, and you probably run into this, is that they didn't have trauma culture back then, and we do now. And trauma culture is, when a client comes to me and says everything's fucked up in my life, a lot of the time people are poised to hear an explanation of like how that's trauma based. And so if I come at it from, are you eating well? Are you sleeping well? Are you hydrating? Are you exercising? Are you reading? Are you writing? Are you journaling? Are you doing all these fundamental things? Are you consciously engaging in your relationships? Or are you just sort of, being adrift and unmoored on a sea of your reactivity? It's like, oh, well, hold on, wait. No, I'm not here to talk about my responsibility for my life. I want you to tell me a story about how trauma has created this. And I'm like, well, sure. But if you don't attend to your part in this first, if you like to whatever extent trauma is informing your inability to do that effectively, first you got to start by like showing up. Now, people will say, well, you can't coach depressed people in that way. You can't push them in that way. And I'm like, yeah, sure, fine. With the exception of people who are like depressed and whose depression doesn't move, right? But for the most part, most people are not suffering from depression in my practice. It's more anxiety and confusion than it is depression.
Oh yeah, sure. Which leads to depression.
Well, trauma. But the thing with trauma culture is that it's constantly, the world is the problem. The world, whatever happened to me, these external circumstances, I suffered from them, and that's created my trauma, right? Which even, by the way, if you go deeper into trauma theory, that's actually fundamentally not true, because trauma theory it's not what happened to you. It's your unconscious reaction to it, right? But still there is that belief. And I think that's a huge difference between what we're seeing here, is that like that ability to say, how can I take responsibility for myself and ask, how can I change in order to fit in? I think is impeded by this belief in trauma, where it's like, no, the world's got to change for me. I want this.
No, you're right. I wouldn't argue with that. Now, let me ask you this. I mean, this is kind of one of those questions. Let's take a situation like a unique person, somebody who, say, an artist, for example, because they're always weird. Not somebody like Phil who's into radios and whatever. It's kind of easy to take a personality like Phil's and kind of shoehorn him into the present culture that he's trying to get into, because he's not weird. He's not out there. Let's take somebody that is. Let's take somebody that is a poet or a musician or whatever. That's really his behavior or her behavior in the culture is radically different. Not destructive, not like let's take all kind of mental weirdness out. Okay, not weird in a mental way, but just weird in an interfacing way with other people.
Like eccentric.
Eccentric, yeah, okay, social eccentric, not Asperger's, not on the spectrum, but somebody that is, I don't even know if this is, I mean, this is a hypothetical because I don't even know if this can exist, but to take someone like that doesn't want to conform, that doesn't want to wear the sweaters and wear the same clothes, and you advise that person like Phil was advised. Do you think he would have a place in that culture, or do you think he would be rejected?
Yeah, you're asking a good question. I mean, and it just so happens that a huge proportion of the clients that I work with are working artists. The worst
same here.
The worst thing that you can be if you're playing the shamanic role of artist, right, is unoriginal, right?
Okay.
And so it's like for a lot of people, normalizing and validating. I just want to be normal. I just want to I don't want to feel different. I don't want to feel abnormal. This is the problem with him, right? The artist, the way of the artist is that's gold to me.
Yes, right.
The deviance, whatever, in my thinking is my fucking gift.
So you're saying his goal wouldn't even be the same.
Look,
like he wouldn't want to fit in.
I think all artists are fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Because you have to be in order to play a shamanic function. I mean, if you look at like who was selected by the collective, by the tribe to perform a shamanic function, it was those who had the gift through their eyes of being able to see things differently. We pathologize that into insanity because I work with artists fundamentally from a perspective that the act of creating art is a shamanic art, and that's the extent that you are actually creating art, you're performing a shamanic function, which requires for you to actually be to lean into and to celebrate and to amplify the uniqueness that normally would be, would create suffering. But that's the other thing, though, and that's why you have the belief in the suffering artist, right? Well, yeah, because you are going to suffer if you see things radically different than anybody else. You're going to be ostracized. And you're going to feel fucking nuts.
And that's part of the role. That's part of the.
But not only that,
that's your calling.
It's not even pathological. It's healthy for you to look around and go, "This is fucked. Does nobody else see this? No, everyone else is fine. They're perfect."
Well, isn't one person's pathology another person's normality and health? I mean, it's like we can't really pathologize,
right? Yeah. In this case, with artists and with the shamanic function, what we're being asked to do from a karmic perspective is to lean into that, and the culture needs us to do that. That's the fundamental necessity of the counterculture. What Heidegger's great point about if you find yourself in the counterculture, you have a responsibility to push back against the dominant paradigm, which actually means that you it's not okay for you to indulge in your own craziness and to become so far out there that no one listens to you anymore, because then you're actually not doing a service to the collective. You're just indulging in your own narcissism. Right?
Yeah. But anyway, the point that I'm getting to is focusing on this. You're absolutely right. I agree with 100%. But thinking of this film again from a conformist perspective.
Yeah.
And we're 1947. Culture can't survive at its utmost unless it's conformative, unless it's complies with the with whatever the ideology is of the time, which would not include artists or these people or shamans or whatever. We're talking about what is being advised to Phil doesn't cover everybody. That there are people that should not do whatever it was. I mean, are we saying that? Are we saying that it's the artist doesn't listen, doesn't comply in that sense, isn't polite, doesn't help other people? Are we going that far? I'm kind of trying to say if you are that outlier like you've described, does the advice given here apply to you?
I mean, I think it would be applied in a very different way. I mean, I think if you're working with someone who is clearly high, in that call, in that drive, The place to start is like, look, it's perfectly understandable that people don't understand you and that you feel alienated and ostracized, right? That's not a bad thing. That's a blessing that you have. And it's never going to be easy for you, right? The idea is that you you take all of that and you turn it and you alchemize that into the production of art. And you're going to be alienated. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you're not free to, if you want to conform and to go along to get along and socialize yourself, you can, but just recognize that it's going to be fucking hard.
Oh, and you're going to be miserable. So it's okay. It's okay to say to an artist, your calling is to be an artist. Therefore, your calling, you must accept that you're going to be miserable.
If you're going to accept the call, if you're going to say yes, then what comes with that is a lot of responsibility and a lot of suffering. The thing with a shamanic call, though, is it's like at that point, it's kind of you do have freedom. You can say no. But what you'll find is that that refusal of the call only increases your suffering, and so to a certain extent, it's I think it's it behooves us at a certain point to just let go and say, okay, I accept the call and I accept what it comes with.
So do you agree?
People are not going to get it. People are not going to get me. No one gets artists, man.
No.
Artists, you put their work on a wall. You publish their work. The great ones at first, everyone goes, "What the fuck are you talking about? You're fucking."
But do you agree with Rilke's resistance to be psychoanalyzed by Freud? You know, at that time where he said, "I don't want my demons tamed, because if they are, then yeah." You know, I grew up with my best friend when I was growing up. His father was an artist, was a Andrew White type of artist, you know, watercolor, whatever, and was really, really quite amazing. Mm-hmm. He made his living doing it, made very good living. He had a gallery in New York, blah, blah, blah. About as good as you can get as a working artist that actually makes money doing what he's doing. And he was one of the most straight-laced, middle-of-the-road guys I've ever known. And I remember as a kid, that confused me, because I thought artists were supposed to be weird and were supposed to be really liberal. And, you know, he was a conservative. He was, I mean, all the things that you would think stereotypically would be what not an artist was. Mm. And he was quite amazing at his work. Mm. So, you know, and raised his kids to be like Phil. You know, to be very interfaced with the culture, very conforming, very blah, blah, blah. Now, I didn't grow up with him, so I have no idea. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe he was quite different than the impression I got from him. But he would be the kind of father you would think would have a job as an engineer, as an accountant, or, you know, any of these very straight-laced kind of conforming professions. And he was an artist every bit of the way. But anyway, we should try to wrap it up a bit. I think we're about done. Do you have anything else you want to say about this? No? Is that a no?
Great advice.
Are you not conforming?
Ostracized in the world, try listening. Shut up and listen.
Well, that's actually something you could do. Yeah,
you'll probably find that it'll work out into your favor, but I would say that on the other end of it, you know, don't dim your light.
No, not at all. And
to speak your mind and to give your brilliant, beautiful ideas space in the ether, because, you know, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've seen our names and our websites down at the bottom here, and anybody that's interested in contacting us, you certainly can do that. We would love to hear comments on the videos that we present, and questions you can ask, and also any suggestions for future podcast releases would be great. And we'll say goodbye and see you probably next week, whenever it might be. And William, you want to say anything? Are you cool? Okay. Take care, everybody. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.